Lakes ran 2 blocks through a Brooklyn subway station before she lost him. The man was gone, her phone with him. She stood on the sidewalk outside Atlantic Avenue, with blood on her palm from the stairs, a backpack on her shoulders, a deadline in 7 hours that required a phone call she could no longer make. Somewhere in this city, a legal filing was waiting for 3 numbers only she knew. Somewhere in a Harlem office, a lawyer was watching the clock. Somewhere in a database, 8 years of work was 45 minutes from being sold to the wrong person. She walked 14 blocks north. Tried 3 doors, got told no 3 times. Then she saw a bus stop, a bench, one last person, man in faded scrubs, phone in his right hand, battery at 9%. She already knew what he was going to say. She asked anyway. Coleman woke up at 5:47 in the morning, not 5:45, not 6:08, because he had done the math years ago, and those 13 extra minutes were the difference between arriving at Harold Reed's apartment with something left in the tank and arriving hollow, that particular exhaustion settling behind the eyes like sediment that refuses to clear. The alarm was not gentle. Default iPhone sound, the kind engineered by someone who has never shared a wall with anyone, aggressive and absolute, IT pulling him out of whatever warmth the dream had been offering. He reached for the phone on the nightstand without opening his eyes. Cracked screen, face peeling at one corner where Jordan had attempted a repair with a strip of tape that lasted exactly 4 days before surrendering. 9% battery. He had forgotten to charge it again. The charging cable in the kitchen had been half broken for 3 weeks. The connection unreliable. The kind of problem that costs $14 to fix, and therefore costs nothing to ignore until the morning you actually need the phone to work. Paid $14 technically, but that $14 was doing load-bearing work in the column of his mental budget labeled things that cannot slip. Replacement cable was not in that column regardless of how many mornings began with 9% and the low-grade awareness of a man who knows his phone needs to survive the day. 9%. He had made it through full days on less. His legs off the bed. The apartment on Nostrand Avenue was small in the way that Brooklyn apartments are small, which is to say that the smallness was architectural fact that he had long since stopped registering except on mornings when the walls felt like they had shifted inward overnight. 2 bedrooms, if you applied the word generously. One was his. One belonged to Jordan, 9 years old, who could sleep through his father's alarm with the total commitment of someone who understood. At a cellular level, that morning had not yet earned his attention. The kitchen floor was cold under bare feet. He opened the refrigerator, 2 eggs, a half carton of milk one day past its date but smelling fine, a container of leftover rice from 2 nights before. He cracked both eggs into the pan. Then he stopped, set one shell down, picked up the intact egg and put it back in the carton. 1 egg. You learn to count like that. You learn to look at 2 eggs and see tomorrow's breakfast living inside one of them. Learn to eat around the edges of what you have, to find a quiet competence in the precision of it, because competence is available even when abundance is not. Terry had been doing this math for 5 years. It never felt good. I was very good at it. He checked his bank balance while the egg cooked. $187.42. Rent was due in 8 days. $950. Placed the phone face down on the counter and did not look at it again. The math did not work. The math never worked. But Terry Coleman had been making impossible math function for 5 years now, and the bills still got paid. Late, with the quiet shame of the automated reminder, arriving before the grace period closed, but paid. He had not missed a rent payment in 5 years, and he was not going to begin now. And he would figure out the gap between $187 and $950 in the next 8 days. Might not need to solve it at 5:51 in the morning, while a single egg cooked in a pan whose handle had been loose for 2 months. Jordan appeared in the kitchen doorway, backpack already on, hair pressed flat on one side from sleep, eyes on the wrong feet, which Jordan had not yet noticed. And Terry decided not to say anything for 30 seconds because there was something in the image. A 9-year-old walking with total authority on inverted shoes. That was the closest thing to uncomplicated joy that 5:01 in the morning could reasonably produce. Dad. Jordan pulled out the chair with the focused drama of someone who had been awake long enough to develop strong feelings about breakfast. Malik's birthday is Friday. Masterson said we can bring stuff. Terry slid the egg onto the plate, poured the glass of milk, set both on the table. We'll see, bud. Jordan looked at his plate, then at his father. He was 9, not 4. Understood what we'll see meant before breakfast for at least 2 years. He understood it now, okay. Jordan said, just that. No negotiation, no secondary attempt, no visible performance of disappointment. Okay, and then the sound of his fork, eating with the efficient focus of someone with a bus to catch. That word cost Terry something every time he heard it. The way Jordan moved through those moments. Accommodating, quiet, 9 years old, and already fluent in the unspoken language of a household that had learned to want less, so the disappointment of falling short would hurt less. Jordan had learned it the way children learn everything important, by watching, by absorbing what was never directly taught. Terry ate standing at the counter, watched his son eat, thought about Malik's birthday and a box of grocery store cupcakes that cost $12, ran the numbers, arrived at the same answer he had arrived at already and set it aside. His scrubs were on the chair by the closet. Light blue, the elbows faded from washing, fabric thinned past the point of looking new, but not yet to the point of looking wrong. His name tag was clipped to the breast pocket. Terry Coleman, Home Health Aide, Bright Care Senior Services. 3 years with Bright Care. Days before that at a different agency with better uniforms, worse management, and 50 cents less per hour, which mattered more than the uniforms, $15.25 an hour. No dental, no vision. 10 sick days a year that he had used exactly 0 of, because sick days were days without pay, and days without pay were not something the math currently accommodated. He almost left the phone on the nightstand. 9% was enough to last until noon if he kept the screen dark and used it only for the arrival log, Bright Care required, and the school texts that arrived approximately twice a week about things that were always fine but required acknowledgement. I'd be with Harold all morning. Harold Reed did not need Terry to have a phone. Harold needed Terry to be present, which was a different requirement and, in Terry's experience, a rarer one. But his hand went to the nightstand anyway, not from thought. From something older than thought, a layer of him that had been rebuilt 5 years ago around a single fact, a layer that would not permit him to leave without a phone, regardless of the percentage displayed in the corner of the cracked screen. He dropped it into his scrub pocket. Jordan was at the door. Backpack zipped, face now on the correct feet. The correction had happened sometime between the kitchen table and the hallway without announcement. Love you, Dad. Love you more, bud. Learn something good today. The door closed. Aiden's footsteps moved quick and certain down the hallway, already confident in the 3-block walk to PS 249 that he had been making alone since 2nd grade, because Terry's shift started at 7:30 and the school did not open until 8:45, and there was no one else to walk him. Jordan knew every bodega owner on the route by first name. He knew which block had the dog that barked from behind a gate but was genuinely friendly if you stopped and let it come to you. He knew his 3-block radius in the detailed, unsentimental way of a child who has paid attention out of necessity. Terry locked the apartment. Took the stairs because the elevator had been out of service since September. The pair apparently suspended in some administrative question the building management had not yet resolved. They stepped out onto Nostrand Avenue into October air that smelled of exhaust and the fresh coconut bread the West Indian bakery 2 doors down put in its window every morning at 6. But walked past that bakery approximately 700 times in 3 years and had gone inside exactly twice, both for occasions he could justify, and he walked past it now at his usual pace. He headed for the B46 stop, same stop, a route, same Wednesday as every other Wednesday for 3 years. The city assembling itself around him, all of it moving toward the same basic daily objective, which was getting through without anything going seriously wrong. Terry was skilled at this objective. He had become precise at the version of life that required only the steady, competent application of effort to a fixed set of circumstances. He did not know yet that today was not that version of a day. Exactly 3 hours and 41 minutes, the phone in his pocket, 9% battery, cracked screen, $14 cable solution deferred was going to be the most consequential object in two people's lives. He did not know that. A man in faded scrubs walking to a bus stop on a Wednesday morning, cataloging what needed doing, called the pharmacy about Harold's blood pressure prescription, which he had forgotten to refill. Log arrival by 7:30. Ivy. Check whether Jordan's teacher had responded to the reading level email. He had not remembered the prescription. He would call from the bus, 8% now. He turned the screen brightness all the way down. This is what most people do not know about Terry Coleman. It does not appear in his employment file at BrightCare Senior Services. His annual review said dependable, thorough, good with difficult patients. All of which were true, none of which was the most important thing about him. The most important thing about Terry Coleman had a name, Monica Reed, before she became Monica Coleman. So she became the shape that absence takes when it reorganizes everything around it. Monica, who laughed too loudly at her own jokes and not quite enough at other people's. Monica, who kept a running list in her phone, restaurants they were going to try when the money and the time aligned, 47 entries when she died, still in Terry's contacts under the name she had given it. Someday. He had not deleted it, not because he had plans to go to 47 restaurants alone, but because deleting it was a thing he understood he was not ready to do. Learned enough about himself in the years since to know that understanding the shape of a wound was not the same as being ready to close it. Monica was an ICU nurse at Brookdale Hospital. 6 years on that floor, 6 years of 12-hour shifts, and the specific fluency of someone who had learned to function at the exact intersection of exhaustion and precision. Certain people are good at things that require them to be better than their circumstances allow for. She came home, smelling like hospital, and still managed somehow, a person in the room who made everything feel like it was going to hold. That was what she did. She made the unmanageable feel manageable, even when it was not. She died on a Tuesday in November 5 years ago. I was driving home from a double shift on I-78 westbound, approaching the Kearney exit, 12:15 in the morning, 26 hours awake, 11 miles from home. Plus the R&B station she always kept on for the drive because the music helped her put the hospital down. Helped her leave the weight of it behind the hospital doors rather than carrying it through the front door of the apartment where Jordan was sleeping. A flatbed truck ran the interchange red, like the driver's side door, at approximately 40 miles per hour. Monica's car crossed 2 lanes and met the concrete divider. She was alive after the impact. This is what Terry has carried in his body for 5 years. Not just the fact of her death, but the exact sequence of it, because the sequence is the thing that does not let you set it down. Monica was conscious. She was badly hurt, the car destroyed around her, but she was reaching for her phone, as in the cup holder where she always kept it, and she picked it up and the screen came on for half a second. Then it went dark, dead battery. Monica sat in that wrecked car on the shoulder of I-78 at 12:15 in the morning, awake, hurting, unable to call anyone. The highway was not empty. Headlights swept through the broken windshield in regular intervals, lit the reg for a fraction of a second each time, kept going. 14 minutes. That is how long she was alone there. 14 minutes of headlights and engine noise and no one pulling over. The 15th car stopped, a woman in a silver Honda. They never learned her name. She called 911 from her own phone, having seen Monica through what remained of the driver's side window. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after that call. Fast, genuinely fast, a good response time. But Monica had been bleeding for 21 minutes by then, and the paramedic who spoke with Terry in the days afterward was careful with the language the way people are careful when they are saying something true that will also be permanent. He said that with earlier intervention, outcome may have been different. 9 minutes earlier, and Monica Reed Coleman might have walked through the front door the next morning, might have eaten the eggs Terry made while Jordan watched cartoons, might have called Brookdale to say she'd be a few hours late and gone back to sleep. 9 minutes, Terry did not talk about this. Not with friends, out with the grief counselor. The hospital connected him to 6 sessions. Sessions he attended and found useful in an intellectual way, and ultimately could not continue because the office required a 40-minute round trip and Jordan was 4 years old and the childcare cost more than the sessions. But with Jordan, who still sometimes asked in the precise and disarming way of children why his mom had to go when he was only 4 and hadn't finished showing her all's drawings yet. He did not talk about it, but he was constructed from it, lived in his hands, in the way he flinched at the descending 2-note tone a phone makes when the battery finally zeroes out, in the way he had never once, in 5 years, told anyone who asked to borrow his phone no. A woman on the subway who needed to text her sister, a teenager outside the bodega whose phone had been stolen, an old man at the Fulton Street laundromat trying to reach his daughter, staring at a flip phone that had stopped cooperating. They had always said yes, every time. Without running the arithmetic that most people run when a stranger approaches with a request, he ran different arithmetic. He ran 9 minutes. He ran a screen that lit for half a second, and the cost of a call that doesn't go through. And he would rather hand someone the last of his battery than spend the rest of his life knowing he could have and didn't. This was not a decision he remade each morning, but a choice he examined and renewed. It was a reflex, something that had been installed in him at the level where the body keeps its oldest knowledge, the knowledge laid down when something happened that reset every default. Monica had reset him. Her death had reset him. And the resetting looked, from the outside, like a man who was unusually generous with his phone. It was not generosity. It was a scar that had learned to function. Acid. Terry had become a home health aide, the way people become things they did not intend to become. Through a chain of circumstances that each made its own local sense and only revealed the destination in retrospect. After Monica died, he had been working as an office administrator for a logistics company in Queens. Regular hours, adequate pay, work that could be done by someone running on 6 hours of sleep, and the focused numbness of early grief. He had been doing it for 2 years when BrightCare posted a listing he saw because Jordan's daycare provider, Mrs. Aurelius, mentioned that her sister worked for a home care agency and they were always hiring. Terry looked it up not because he wanted a new job, but because something in him had begun to insist that the work he spent his life doing should feel like it mattered, and the logistics company had never made him feel that. 5 years after Monica, he had finally identified the insistence as a need he could no longer defer without cost. The job paid less. The hours were less predictable. The work was intimate in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. The intimacy of entering someone's home every morning and becoming the structure of their day, a person responsible for medication taken and meals eaten, and the afternoon's loneliness not compounding into something worse. He was good at it. Not in the metric way that shows up on a performance review, but in the way that caused Harold Reed, who had outlived his wife and his 2 closest friends and had stopped expecting people to actually show when they said they would, to begin leaving his door unlocked. On mornings he knew Terry was coming, but he did not want to make Terry wait in the hallway. Harold Reed was 81 years old, a carpenter for 4 decades, his hands still carrying the weight of 40 years of shaped wood, broad, calloused, slightly too large for the frame they belonged to. He lived alone in a rent-stabilized apartment on Fulton Street, with a cat named Bessie and a bookshelf of photo albums. He could no longer see clearly enough to navigate without help, learn to identify them by the texture of their spines. The worn red one from the 1960s, the blue one that belonged to his daughter, who had moved to Phoenix 3 years ago and left it behind, along with her intention to visit soon. Visited 5 days a week. He helped Harold bathe, a routine that had taken several weeks to establish and was now simply part of the morning, efficient and matter-of-fact, never referenced beyond its practical necessity. He cooked, maintained the medication schedule written on an index card taped inside the cabinet above the mugs. Blood pressure at 8, thyroid at noon, aspirin with food, eye drops twice daily. He read Harold the newspaper because Harold maintained, a conviction of someone who had thought it through, that the internet was not news but opinions wearing news's clothes, and that the difference was not minor. Most mornings, Harold Reed was the only person who asked Terry how he was doing. In the hallway way, the "how are you" that expects fine before you've finished asking. Harold asked with the patience of someone who had learned that time was the one resource he had more of than he'd expected. Ed decided to spend it on actual answers. He asked over morning coffee, 2 cups, Harold's with 1 sugar and a measure of milk that Harold called a splash and that Terry privately assessed as a pour. And most mornings, Aide changed the subject before the answer could become honest. "You can't pour from an empty cup, son," Harold said approximately every 3rd morning. "I know, Mr. Harold," Terry said approximately every 3rd morning. He knew. They also knew that knowing a thing and acting on it are related the way a map and a road are related. They describe the same territory, but you still have to do the driving. Terry Coleman had been pouring from a cup running low for 5 years and had not yet found the refill. They'd not have time to find it right now, because he had a prescription to call in and an arrival log to submit, and a son he needed to be financially present for by the end of the month. He got on the B-46 when it came, sat near the window. Blake watched Crown Heights pass. The bodegas and barber shops, the scaffolding that had been on the St. John's building for 8 months and showed no sign of coming down, the woman who walked the small dog at the same time every morning, a specific continuity of a neighborhood that did not adjust its pace for anyone moving through it. He called the pharmacy on hold for 4 minutes, got the prescription sorted, put the phone back in his pocket. 8%. Let me tell you about Vanessa Carter. But to tell you about Vanessa Carter in October means starting 12 months earlier. Not 14, as the legal filings would eventually say, because the filings measure from the board vote, and the board vote happened in October, 12 months before the morning at the bus stop. In a conference room on the 32nd floor of a building in Midtown, morning when she arrived at work and her key card did not open the door. She swiped it twice. The reader blinked red both times. She looked at the security desk. Raymond, who had been at that desk every morning for 4 years and nodded at her every one of those mornings, was looking at his computer screen with the focused attention of someone who has been specifically instructed to look at his computer screen. Vanessa understood then. Before the HR representative stepped out of the elevator, carrying a folder and wearing the expression of someone who has practiced this in a mirror. Before the conference room on 12, where a cardboard box sat on the table containing her coffee mug, her framed photo of her mother, and a Wharton degree she had hung on the wall, not out of pride, but out of the specific reminder it offered on days when she needed reminding. Understood it in the lobby, from the angle of Raymond's attention. They had already packed her things. To understand what was taken from Vanessa Carter that morning, have to understand what she had built, which means starting not in Midtown but in Atlanta. 4 years before that October, on a Sunday afternoon when her mother called her from the kitchen floor. Patricia Carter was 72 years old and had lived alone in the Cascade Heights house since Vanessa's father passed 8 years earlier. Was capable and proudly independent, and had made clear to anyone who raised the subject that she intended to remain both of those things for as long as biology permitted. She had her church, her book club, a garden that produced more tomatoes than she could give away, like the fierce self-sufficiency of a woman who had raised 2 children largely alone after her husband's first cardiac event, and was not about to ask for help with anything that didn't require it in writing. That Sunday, she fell in the bathroom, reaching for a towel from the rack beside the shower, a rack that had always been positioned slightly too high, that Vanessa had offered twice to lower and twice been assured was perfectly fine. She fell, caught the side of the tub with her hip, and could not get up. She was conscious. She was not critically injured in the way that produces permanence, but she was on the tile floor and her phone was in the kitchen 4 hours. Hours before Mrs. Bridges next door, who had been expecting Patricia for their Sunday card game and got no answer on the phone, came to check. 4 hours on the tile, alone with the specific terror of a capable woman encountering the hard boundary of her capability. The doctors used the word lucky. Vanessa had driven to Atlanta that night, had sat with her mother in the waiting area, had held her hand while her mother held herself together with the same dignity she applied to every situation, and had thought, with the clarity that arrives just before grief becomes grief, that this should not still be possible, but a system should exist, that she should build one, She went home and started building it. CareSync was the direct product of that night and that tile floor and those 4 hours. A software platform connecting elderly patients living alone with their caregivers, families, physicians, and insurance providers through a single interface. It flagged irregular patterns. The refrigerator unopened by 9 in the morning, the medication reminder dismissed without acknowledgement, the smart watch detecting a heart rate that warranted a check. Reduced coordination overhead for home care from an average of 4.7 separate contacts per incident to 1.2. It worked on older infrastructure. It was built, specifically and without compromise, affordable for the communities that needed it most. The communities where Patricia Carter's lived alone and fell and waited 4 hours for someone to notice. Vanessa built the first version on her own laptop at her kitchen table in the Tribeca apartment, evenings and weekends, while holding a senior product management role at a health tech company, whose name she no longer uses in conversation. Worked on it for a year before she showed it to anyone. Then she showed it to Scott Hill. Scott Hill had 15 years in health tech finance. He had closed 2 successful funding rounds for adjacent startups. They had board relationships Vanessa didn't have, and he had approached her at a conference 3 months before she was ready to show CareSync to anyone and told her. With the confidence of someone who has correctly identified an opportunity as building something important, and that when she was ready for a partner, he wanted to be considered. She considered him carefully. Interviewed former colleagues. Reviewed his track record, and checked the companies he had touched and how they had come through it. Everything held up. Scott Hill was a skilled operator who had helped build real things. The due diligence didn't show, because it wasn't yet visible, was that Scott Hill was a patient man. Patient in the specific, architectural way of someone who understands that the most durable method of taking something from someone is to first help them build it large enough to be worth taking. Aide Novabridge as CFO and co-founder when the company was 18 months old, closed the Series A at $11 million. His advice in the early years was genuinely good advice. Gave Vanessa room to lead, while ensuring that the people around investor tables understood he was the reason those tables existed. Year 3, the Series B, $38 million. In the documentation package for that round, the company's outside counsel, a contract attorney Scott had used on a previous deal, was a clause 11 lines long. It assigned to Novabridge Medical any intellectual property developed by employees during their employment. Trusted language. Vanessa's attorney reviewed the package, flagged 6 items, and did not flag this one, stated, because the language was genuinely standard, and no one in that room was thinking about the possibility that the CEO and founder of the company would later be treated as an employee whose original work could be claimed by the entity she had created. No one considered it because it was absurd, which was exactly what Scott Hill was counting on. He spent the following 4 years continuing to be useful. Present at every dinner, attentive to birthdays and family milestones, sending the right material at the right moment. By year 8, with Novabridge at $180 million valuation, and CareSync operating across 23 states, Scott Hill had majority relationships with 5 of the 7 board members. Vanessa held 1 seat. The 7th member had been appointed in the Series C round and owed the appointment to Scott's recommendation. October meeting was called as an emergency session. Vanessa received notification 20 minutes before it began. Worded as a scheduling request she assumed was a minor item, because she was mid-call with Memphis about a pilot expansion, and confirmed her attendance without asking for the agenda. Walked into the boardroom to find Scott Hill at the head of the table, with a 17-page document she had never seen. A performance review apparently produced by a committee that had assembled without her knowledge. Layers of her decisions recontextualized. Not fabricated exactly, because the decisions had all happened, but framed with the precision of a portrait intended to produce an unflattering likeness. The vote was 5-2, a temporary administrative suspension pending governance review. Vanessa sat in the conference room on 12 with the box and the HR representative reading from a script and understood slowly and then all at once what had been built around her, at the dramatic architecture of a sudden assault. The patient, a structural displacement of someone who had spent 4 years rearranging the furniture so quietly that she had not noticed until she was standing in the center of a room from which the floor had been removed. She picked up the box, looked at Scott Hill, who had the expression of a man performing a rehearsed moment correctly. He said something about governance obligations, something about this not being personal. Vanessa said nothing, carried the box to the elevator and rode down 32 floors and stood on the sidewalk on 7th Avenue in the October sun and thought. With the practical urgency of a mind that operates in solutions even when it is breaking, made a mistake somewhere, I only have to find it. Lawyer first, Kevin Adeyemi, intellectual property and corporate, 43rd floor of a glass building in Midtown. Kevin reviewed the employment agreement, the IP assignment clause, the documentation around the Series B, and looked at Vanessa across his conference table, with the honest expression of an attorney who respects the person across from him, enough not to soften the numbers. You're right about the underlying ownership. A clause has a weakness I can work with, a pause, but Hill's team will bury you in discovery. They'll delay every motion, counter every fifling, stretch this to 2 years. To fight it properly, aid to be capitalized for a war of attrition. $250,000 minimum. Vanessa had $31,000 in personal savings. Everything else had gone into the company over 8 years. Salary reinvested, Rita's personal expenditures deferred. The financial self-compression of someone who believed enough in what she was building to bet her entire position on it. Kevin gave her 2 things before the money ran out: their understanding of the legal gap that existed in the IP clause, and a documented case file she carried to every meeting afterward. The first month's retainer cost $8,000. End of month 3, she had less than $4,000 left. Kevin called her in on a Tuesday and was honest in the way that lawyers with intact consciences are honest. Directly, out the softening that would have made it easier to dismiss. I believe in your case. But I can't continue without payment, and even if I could, Hill's team is running a delay strategy. Every motion we file gets countered. A counter requires a response. They have 12 people billing hours against your one. They are not trying to win on the merits. They are trying to run you out of the ability to continue. She understood him. Understanding him did not change the arithmetic. She lost the Tribeca apartment in month 4. She moved into a spare bedroom in Bed-Stuy, $1,500 a month to Angela, a generous woman with an actual family in a 2-bedroom apartment who never once said anything unkind and whose kitchen cabinets, by the 6th week, were being closed with a force that communicated its message without requiring words. Left before Angela had to ask, East New York room. Then the motor lodge on Atlantic, the smell in the walls, 4 television channels, a mattress that suggested several previous chapters. Then, his lodge became financially untenable. The car, a 5-year-old Camry she hadn't yet sold, parked in a 24-hour garage near Flatbush at $12 a day. Baked. The back seat with a blanket she had taken from the motor lodge because she had paid for it through the room rate and believed this was a defensible position. She applied for jobs. MBA from Wharton, as building a company from an idea to a $180 million valuation, a track record that should have opened every senior door she approached. Every door was closed before she arrived. Not visibly, not provably, a quiet back-channel way that powerful people reroute careers they have decided to end. Scott Hill had made calls. The calls could not be introduced as evidence, but their effect was real. Effect was that every senior position she applied for in the 12 months following her suspension had already been foreclosed by the time her application landed. Mid-level roles, then junior roles. One callback, project coordinator position at a health tech company in New Jersey. Made it to the second interview. Then silence. By month 9, the car was repossessed. 3 weeks behind on the garage payments. Stood outside the garage on a Tuesday afternoon with her backpack and the external hard drive, and absorbed the experience of watching a decline she had understood intellectually arrive at a floor she had not fully believed was possible. Like drive, this was what she had protected above everything else, above comfort and above pride and, in practical terms, above her own stability. The drive contained 3 years of development history for CareSync, every commit, build log, design note, the complete documented record of what she had created and when. It contained the source code for Module 7, the integration framework she had built for CareSync's real-time multi-system connectivity, a piece that made everything else actually function as a whole. She had never pushed Module 7 to Novabridge's company repository because she had been in the middle of final testing when Scott's board vote happened. A push had been 2 days away. Module 7 did not exist, officially, in Novabridge's codebase. Scott Hill did not know it existed. The version of CareSync he controlled was complete enough to demonstrate, impressive enough to have generated a serious acquisition offer from a large health system operator. But it was 60% of what the product was designed to be. Facing 40% was on a hard drive that Vanessa Carter had been sleeping beside for months. She found the legal weakness in month 10 at the Brooklyn Public Library on Grand Army Plaza. Free internet, free electricity, but warm enough to stay from open to close. She had been teaching herself contract law for weeks, working through legal databases with the focused urgency of someone who cannot afford to hire expertise and must therefore become it. IP assignment clause applied to intellectual property developed during the scope of employment as defined by the employment agreement. Vanessa's employment agreement defined her role as Chief Executive Officer, Strategic Direction, Investor Relations, Executive Team Management, Board Communications. Software development was not in the description. The engineers had their own employment agreements with their own IP provisions. Vanessa's agreement had never characterized her as a developer because at the time of signing, describing the company's CEO as a developer had seemed unnecessary. Algorithm she had written on her own laptop at her own kitchen table in the evenings and on weekends before Novabridge Medical LLC was incorporated did not fall within the scope of employment as her contract described it. The clause had a gap. The gap was her. Lorraine Mitchell ran a law practice from the second floor of a brownstone on 125th Street in Harlem. No receptionist. A printer that jammed every third document. Main cabinet holding cases that most corporate firms would not have taken. She was 53 years old and had spent 22 years doing the work that does not appear in legal journals. Sitting across from founders and employees who had been robbed within the technical margins of agreements they had signed without fully understanding, and finding the specific lever that allowed enough force to matter. A volunteer at the library had seen Vanessa at the same terminal for 3 weeks, working with the urgency of someone whose situation did not allow for research that was merely academic. He passed her name to Lorraine. Lorraine reviewed the file in an afternoon. Called Vanessa. The following morning, I've seen Hill's work before. Different company, same architecture. Paper moving at the other end of the line. Here's what I need from you. I file the emergency injunction. I need you to confirm 3 technical specifications in Module 7. The declaration needs to describe precisely what Hill's version is missing and why that absence matters legally. Deadline for the emergency filing was 5 p.m. on Tuesday. This Tuesday at 6:45 in the morning, on the downtown 2 train, latest man in a gray hoodie took Vanessa's phone from her hand and was through the subway car doors before she processed what had happened. She reached the platform in time to see him on the stairs. She took the stairs 3 at a time and lost him at street level, where he was faster and knew the block and she did not. She stood outside the Atlantic Avenue station with her backpack, her hard drive, and no phone. Her right palm was scraped from the stairwell railing, bleeding in the persistent minor way of a palm scrape that intends to continue for a while. Lorraine's direct line was a landline number. 11 digits. Lorraine had given her specifically for situations where app-based calling wouldn't work, where a direct dial was the only option. The number was not written down anywhere, because Vanessa had not anticipated that the situation requiring it would also be the situation in which she had no phone. She went into a bodega on Atlantic. The man behind the counter looked at the scraped hand, the backpack, of someone who had just chased a mugger up a flight of subway stairs, and said no. The woman coming out of the laundromat next door said no. The pharmacy pointed to a sign, "Staff phones not available to customers." She kept walking, 8 blocks north. B46 bus stop on Nostrand Avenue, 9:48 in the morning. The October sun direct and offering nothing in the way of warmth. 5 people at the stop. She approached them in sequence. A man in office clothes did not look up from his own screen. The teenager with the outsized headphones removed one side, heard the first sentence, replaced it, rotated his body 45 degrees. The older woman listened, looked at Vanessa's hand, looked at her face, and moved 3 feet to the left with the precise deliberateness of someone establishing a boundary. Vanessa stood at the B46 stop and thought about the library on Grand Army Plaza, 18 blocks. Library opened at 10. It was 9:51. If she walked fast, she could be at the library's public phone before 10:05. The filing deadline was 5 p.m. The math worked barely. She started to turn. Then she looked at the bench. Lighten person remaining. A man in his late 30s, light blue scrubs faded at the elbows. A name tag she couldn't read from this distance. A phone in his right hand. The screen was turned dim to save battery. That detail registered. She was about to ask a man with almost no battery left to let her use his almost dead phone, because she had no other option that preserved the deadline. She walked over. She was aware of how she looked. Lights in the shelter on Atlantic because the garage was gone. Awake since 5:30. A scraped and still bleeding palm. Plain clothes. She had made sure of that. But she understood that the overall composition was not the kind that opened doors. 3 doors had already confirmed this. She stood in front of the man in the scrubs. "I'm sorry to bother you. Oh, how this looks. My phone was stolen this morning on the subway." She kept her voice level, which required something. "I need 1 phone call. 1 call to my attorney. There is a legal deadline today at 5 o'clock. If I miss it, I lose something I have spent 3 years fighting to keep. I would not ask if I had any other option left." She stopped. Let him see her. Terry Coleman looked up. He saw what the 3 people before him had seen. The scraped hand, the backpack, the exhaustion of someone running on less than enough for longer than a sprint should last. He saw what had made the first 3 people step back, and then he saw something they had not stayed long enough to notice. The way she was standing, straight, shoulders back, not performing composure but actually practicing it. The way you do when you have spent time in rooms where how you hold yourself is one of the few things still within your control. The way her voice had stayed level. The way she had said, "I know how it looks." Not a plea for sympathy, not a request for the benefit of the doubt, but a plain acknowledgement of reality that had cost her something to say and said it anyway. He looked at his phone. 8%. He thought about Monica, about the shoulder of I-78, like a screen that lit for half a second. About 9 minutes. About 14 cars that kept moving and one that stopped. He held the phone out. "Here." His voice was low and without performance. "Be quick. Battery's almost gone." Vanessa looked at the phone in his hand, then at his face. She took it. Her fingers were cold. His were warm. The exchange lasted less than a second. Neither of them registered it consciously. But later, much later, after everything that followed, both of them would remember the exact temperature of it, the precise quality of being handed something by someone who did not ask for a reason first. She dialed Lorraine's number from memory. 11 digits. No hesitation, the phone rang twice. Lorraine picked up on the second ring. Vanessa stepped 5 paces to the right, close enough that the phone's owner could still see his phone, far enough that the conversation had room. She could see him from the edge of her vision, looking at the street, doing the deliberate, considered thing of not listening, offering privacy through the simple act of turning his attention elsewhere. She had not expected that. She had expected someone watching the phone, playing the clock, counting down. She started talking, not catching up, not explaining, in the way of someone who has been holding a precise sequence of technical information in their head for 19 days and is now releasing it with the controlled specificity of something that must land in the right order. Lorraine. Vanessa. "I lost my phone this morning, stolen on the 2 train. Calling from someone else's phone and the battery is almost gone, so right as I go, no pause. Forward motion." Module 7. Section 4 of the Employment Agreement. The scope provision covers only development work assigned through the product roadmap process. Module 7 was never on a roadmap. Doesn't appear in any Nova Bridge sprint documentation. because I built it on my own time before the roadmap process existed. The commit logs on my external drive show the initial builds predating my employment agreement by 11 months. Lorraine's voice was the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call with a pen already in hand, unhurried. Precise. The declaration needs the technical parameter, the one that separates Module 7 from what NovaBridge can demonstrate on their own, real-time multi-system synchronization. The integration framework uses a handshake protocol I designed for legacy health system APIs. L's team doesn't have the protocol documentation because I never submitted it to the company repository. It's in the build notes on the drive. Folder M7 Dev, subfolder integration, file handshake v4 final, creation timestamp of the year before NovaBridge was incorporated. A pause, the sound of a pen on paper, then, that's the third specification, that's what I need. You can file, I'm filing at 4:45, not waiting for the deadline. Another pause, shorter, lesser. Get somewhere stable. I'll call you at the office number when it's confirmed. The call was 5 minutes and 14 seconds. She knew because she had been watching the timer the way you watch a fuel gauge on an empty road. When she ended the call and looked at the corner of the screen, the battery said 7%. And the number felt like a verdict on something larger than the phone. She stood still for a moment, with her eyes closed, October sun on her face illuminating without warming. Then she turned back to the bench. Harry Coleman was watching her with the expression of someone who has made a quiet assessment and decided that asking about it was less important than making sure the person in front of him was okay. He did not ask what the call had been, but ask if anything was resolved. He held out his hand for the phone, and Vanessa placed it back into his palm with the careful deliberateness of returning something that had been lent rather than given. Oakst saved something I spent 3 years fighting for. Her voice fractured on the last word, not breaking, fracturing, the register of someone holding everything together with the last of what they have. You don't know what you did. Looked at her, at the scraped hand and the backpack and the eyes that were dry, only because she had decided they would be. He looked at her the way he had learned to look at people after Monica, not at what was visible, but at what the visible was in front of. I hope your day gets better from here. Low, without decoration, Vanessa looked at him for a moment beyond what the situation required. Then the B-46 came around the corner, facing their pressure, doors folding open, and Terry stood and shouldered his bag. There was nothing left to say that the moment had given them words for. She watched him board, watched the doors close. A bus pulled from the curb, and she could see him through the glass, finding a seat on the far side, and then the bus made its turn and was gone. She stood at the empty stop on Nostrand Avenue and did not move for close to a full minute. I didn't know his name, but she knew his hands. She knew the way he had held the phone out without asking why she needed it. She knew the way he had looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, with the complete, level attention of someone for whom seeing people was not incidental but essential. After 12 months of doors that closed before she arrived, of rooms that decided what she was before she opened her mouth, luck had landed with a weight she had not anticipated. She did not know yet what she was going to do with it. She only knew, standing at the empty bus stop with the October morning continuing around her, that she was going to do something. The filing went in at 4:47 p.m. Lorraine called to confirm from the 125th Street office, the printer jamming in the background with its characteristic bad timing. Vanessa was in the shelter on Atlantic Avenue. Oak, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed with the hard drive on the blanket beside her and her back against the wall. And when Lorraine said it's filed, all 3 specs, the court has it, felt something give way in her chest. Not the clean release of a victory, but the gradual, structural easing of something that had been braced for 12 months and was finally, incrementally, permitted to stop. She did not cry immediately. Man, she held the feeling for the moment, letting it exist without performing it. Iced, cried the way you cry when the body has been maintaining a deficit for a year under considerable structural cost, and the deficit is suddenly permitted to discharge. They pressed her palm against the wall beside the narrow bed and cried with the drive beside her, and Lorraine's voice still on the line, and it was not a composed cry, and it was not a tidy cry, and it was exactly what it needed to be. Somewhere in the middle of it, she thought about the B46 stop on Nostrand Avenue. 7% battery. A man in faded scrubs, who had held out his hand without asking for a justification, had looked at her and seen a person when the entire preceding morning had established that this was not the default outcome. She did not know his name. That night, she decided she was going to find out. 11 days after that Wednesday morning, at 4:47 in the afternoon, Lorraine Mitchell submitted a 43-page emergency motion to the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The motion requested a temporary restraining order, blocking Novabridge Medical from executing any intellectual property transfer agreement pending resolution of a dispute over the original ownership of CareSync's foundational architecture. Lorraine had filed emergency motions before. She knew the difference between a filing that had a chance and one that had the form of a chance without the substance. This one had the substance. First exhibit was a forensic analysis of Vanessa's external hard drive, conducted by a digital forensics firm in Midtown that Lorraine had worked with on 4 previous cases. Analysis confirmed that the earliest development files for CareSync's core algorithm predated the incorporation of Novabridge Medical by 14 months. The timestamps were independently verified. File metadata matched the hardware signatures of a personal laptop Vanessa had purchased 5 years before Novabridge existed, a laptop she had preserved, unopened and unmodified since the board vote, of custody documented in a notarized declaration that left no gap in the record. The second exhibit was a 47-minute video file. Vanessa in her Tribeca kitchen, seated at a table with a laptop, demonstrating the first working version interfaces for a potential seed investor. Recorded on her phone, date and time embedded in the file metadata, 14 months before Novabridge Medical LLC was incorporated. Vanessa alone in the frame, because Novabridge did not yet exist, because there was no one else to be in the frame. The product on the screen was unmistakably CareSync. The person explaining it was unmistakably its creator, working from the kind of complete, instinctive knowledge that does not come from reviewing someone else's work. The third exhibit was the M7 Dev folder, the handshake protocol documentation, a creation timestamp from April of the year before Novabridge was incorporated. 3 technical specifications that Lorraine had written down during a 5-minute and 14-second phone call made from a borrowed phone at a bus stop on Nostrand Avenue. Novabridge's legal team responded within 72 hours with 380 pages of corporate documentation. Meeting notes, sprint records, project codes, internal communications, assembled infrastructure of an argument that CareSync had been developed through a collaborative company process during Vanessa Carter's employment, and that the IP assignment clause applied accordingly. It was a substantial response. That was also a response that had been built around the 60% of the product they had, without knowing that 40% of the product existed elsewhere. The federal judge assigned to the motion requested a technical demonstration. Both parties had 7 business days to prepare. Novabridge would demonstrate the full functionality of CareSync, as described in their current investor materials and sale documentation. Vanessa would present whatever she had. Novabridge's engineering team worked through a weekend. They reached 60%. The real-time multi-system synchronization did not function. The integration layer connected to legacy health APIs inconsistently, dropped sessions under load, and produced a data synchronization error on the third test that the team could not resolve before the demonstration deadline. Aide engineer, a careful man who had been at Novabridge for 2 years and had nothing personally invested in the outcome except the integrity of his own technical assessment, documented the failure in precise language. A product as currently maintained by Novabridge does not perform to the specification described in the investor materials. Vanessa demonstrated Module 7 from her laptop. The entire system ran. All functions, all integrations, all the real-time synchronization that Novabridge's team had failed to replicate. She ran it for 11 minutes, showing the judge's technical consultant each component in sequence, and the consultant asked 4 questions, answered all 4 without hesitation, because every part of it was hers, and she had built it with her. Then she knew it, the way you know a house you built yourself. In the dark, by feel, like needing to think about where the walls are. The judge issued the temporary restraining order the following morning. No IP transfer, no sale, no execution of any agreement relating to CareSync's intellectual property until the ownership dispute was fully adjudicated. 3 days after the restraining order, discovery began. Discovery was the process by which Scott Hill's documentation revealed, under the examining pressure of Lorraine's interrogatories, the problem he had not accounted for. Investor materials he had distributed to the health system operator, the ones describing CareSync's full functionality, including the real-time synchronization his team could not replicate, had been prepared and circulated before the technical demonstration failure. Though the demonstration had established that the current company codebase could not perform what the materials promised, Scott Hill had made representations to investors about a product capability that the company did not, at the time of those representations, have the technical means to deliver. The board convened an emergency session. This one, unlike the session 12 months earlier, included Vanessa Carter, a free seat. She sat at the conference table on the 32nd floor, in the same room where the cardboard box had been waiting for her, and listened to the board's outside counsel describe the legal exposure from Scott Hill's investor communications. Each board member processed the information in real time, watched the calculations shift in their faces as the numbers resolved into a clear direction. Scott Hill across the table with the expression of a man who has been running a long game and has just discovered the game contained a rule he did not read. He did not speak during the session. He sat with his hands flat on the table and he did not speak. The vote to remove Scott Hill was unanimous. The board member whose appointment Scott had recommended voted to remove him. Not because that member had arrived at a moral position. The legal exposure was significant, and the path of least institutional damage ran directly through Scott Hill's departure. That is the part of this that should sit with you uncomfortably. Scott Hill did not lose his position because what he did was wrong. He lost it because what he did became financially inconvenient for the people around him. The wrong had existed from the beginning. The inconvenience was new. Are different things, and the story does not pretend they are the same. Lorraine called Vanessa from the 125th Street office. The printer jammed mid-call with its characteristic indifference to timing. Hill is out. Board voted this morning. The restraining order holds while we build the full adjudication case. Vanessa, a pause that carried weight. You're back in the room. Vanessa was sitting on the edge of the narrow shelter bed on Atlantic Avenue, the hard drive on the blanket beside her, her back against the wall. When Lorraine said those 5 words, she felt something give way in her chest. Not the clean release of a one fight, but the slow, structural easing of someone who has been bracing against a wall for 12 months and has finally been permitted to stop. She did not cry immediately. She sat with it for a moment, letting it exist without shaping it into anything. Then she cried the way the body cries when it has been maintaining a deficit under considerable cost, and the deficit is suddenly permitted to discharge. It pressed her palm against the shelter wall and cried with the hard drive beside her, and Lorraine's voice still on the line, saying her name. And then, somewhere in the middle of it, she thought about a bus stop on Nostrand Avenue. 7% battery. A man in faded scrubs who had not assessed her circumstances and rendered a verdict, who had simply held out his hand as though the next step in the sequence were obvious. She did not know his name. That night, I decided she was going to find out. A search lasted 8 days. Vanessa returned to the B46 stop on Nostrand Avenue the following morning at 9:30. Same position, watching every bus that pulled up between 9:30 and 11, scanning each face that boarded or stepped off, looking for a man in light blue scrubs with a name tag and the specific way of holding himself that she would know at a distance. Even now, he was not there Thursday, not Friday. Went back Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday again. 8 consecutive mornings, and Terry Coleman did not appear, but something else happened in the watching. Vanessa had spent 8 years building a product for communities she had grown up near, but had, in the years of building, gradually moved away from. The Tribeca apartment. the investor dinners, the conference presentations where she stood at the front of rooms describing people's lives to rooms full of people who had the capital to fund solutions for those lives but did not live them. She had kept her mission statement honest. Had not in a long time simply sat on a bench and watched the people care sink was built for move through their actual days. She watched a woman in nursing scrubs come off the B-46 at 9:50, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, eyes carrying the particular half-closure of someone finishing a 12-hour overnight shift, who still held the bus door for the person behind her before moving on. Reached a man in a custodian's uniform, reading a paperback western. During the 10 minutes he sat waiting for a connecting bus. She watched a woman with a BrightCare logo on her bag, a home health aide, same work Terry did, working through something on her phone with the focused frown of someone doing math that isn't cooperating. The same math Terry did every morning, the math of people who could not afford for anything to go wrong. Safety care sink had been built for this woman at the bus stop, for her and for the elderly people she cared for, and for the families trying to manage care from a distance on an insufficient budget with an insufficient number of hours in the day. Vanessa had not forgotten this, but she had not been sitting on a bench watching it either. Not for years. 8 mornings on that bench taught her something about the distance between knowing who you are building for and actually seeing them, a distance she had let grow without noticing it was growing. On the 8th morning, she called Lorraine, as wearing scrubs, BrightCare Senior Services logo on the name tag. I could see the colors even if I couldn't read the name. If he works a regular morning route through that stop, he's likely assigned to a client in the area. BrightCare is one of maybe 20 agencies servicing Crown Heights and the surrounding neighborhoods. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone rearranging their understanding of what they are being asked to help with. Trying to find a home health aide, working for BrightCare, based on a bus stop observation and the color of his scrubs. I want to thank him. Properly. It sounds like something you're going to do regardless of whether I help you. Not unkind. Accurate. Call the agents directly. You won't get a name from a cold inquiry, but you can confirm service areas and ask them to pass a message. Vanessa started calling that afternoon, of the same systematic focus 6 she had applied to everything in the preceding 12 months. The focus of someone who has learned that the difference between finding something and not finding it is almost always the willingness to make the next call after the previous one fails. AC 1. No one fitting that description on the Brooklyn roster. Agency 2 through 7, the same answer. Agency 2 through 13, no. Agency 14, Brooklyn Home Care Partners, no. Agency 15 was BrightCare Senior Services. And who answered had developed, through years of intake work, a finely calibrated ability to distinguish between legitimate inquiries and ones that required caution. She listened to Vanessa's description. A pause. I have a Terry Coleman on our Crown Heights route, but I can't provide employee information. What is this regarding? Vanessa's hand tightened on the phone. Her mouth went slightly dry, a new sensation. She had been making difficult calls for 12 months, and her mouth had not done that once. My name is Vanessa Carter. He lent me his phone at a bus stop when mine was stolen. I want to thank him. Pass along my name and a number where I can be reached. He can decide whether to respond. That's all I'm asking. The pause stretched long enough that Vanessa considered that the answer was no. I'll pass the message, Aime said. Finally, Vanessa gave Lorraine's office number. Then she sat down on the step outside the building where she'd made the call and held the phone, and let the October afternoon continue around her. Lorraine called BrightCare first. Ace was the right decision, and it was Lorraine's decision, not Vanessa's. Because Lorraine understood something that Vanessa, in the particular tunnel of gratitude, had not fully thought through. Tracking down a single father through his employer was not inherently a heartwarming story. It was, depending on how it arrived, a reason for alarm. Lorraine called BrightCare as an attorney, provided her Bar Association number for verification, and described the situation in the language of someone who does this professionally. A client involved in a legal matter had received material assistance from a BrightCare employee and wished to express appreciation in an appropriate and transparent manner. requested that the message be relayed with full context so the employee could make an informed choice. Terry received the message at Harold Reed's apartment on a Thursday afternoon, mid-newspaper, title of Harold insisting on the sports section. Despite his documented indifference to professional basketball and his deeply personal feelings about what he called the general disappearance of craft from American track and field, he read the message twice. Then he handed the phone to Harold, because Harold had noticed his stillness the way Harold noticed everything. Harold read it, set the phone on the tray table, looked at Terry with the expression of a man who has lived long enough to recognize when something is trying to reach someone. A lawyer called about the woman you lent your phone to. Ace carried the quality of quiet observation rather than interrogation. That doesn't happen over a small thing, son. Terry looked at the sports section, which neither of them was reading. He thought about the bus stop, the scraped hand. She had held the phone after the call, just for a moment, like she needed to steady herself before returning it. He called Lorraine's office that evening. They arranged a meeting. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock, a coffee shop on DeKalb Avenue in Fort Greene Public Place. Lorraine would come with Vanessa. Terry could bring anyone he chose. Terry came alone. He arrived at 1:52 and ordered coffee and sat in the chair nearest the door, not because he planned to leave Agat, but because his experience of the past 5 years had established that sitting near the door was the posture of someone who is not fully committed to whatever was about to happen, and that was an honest posture for where he actually was at 2:09. Vanessa Carter walked through the door. Looked different. Of course she did. Clean clothes, carefully pressed, hair pinned back with intention, the composed alignment of someone who has spent years in rooms where how you present yourself is information that others read and act on. That is not the woman from the bus stop in the visible sense. But she was the same woman. He recognized it immediately. The way she read the room before committing to it, scanning without appearing anxious, oriented. Her eyes found him, and she did not perform surprise, even though he looked different too. Out of scrubs, rested, not sitting at a bus stop with 8% battery in a faded blue uniform. Lorraine Mitchell came in 2 steps behind her. Tall, gray suit, the stillness of someone who has spent decades in rooms where stillness itself communicated something. They sat across from him. No one said anything for a moment. Then Vanessa, "I've been looking for you for 9 days," looked at her. What came out was, different from the bus stop. Her mouth shifted into something that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. "You look different, too. Same hands, though." Looked at his hands on the table. The hands that had managed Harold's medication bottles, helped with Jordan's homework, held a phone out to a stranger at a bus stop. Because 8% was still enough, she told him everything. The legal version, not the technical version, the human version. The one that started in Atlanta on a Sunday afternoon with her mother on a bathroom floor. She told him about the kitchen table, and the laptop, and the 47-minute video, and the 8 years that turned a single problem into a $180 million company, and a product keeping elderly people safer across 23 states. She told him about Scott Hill, not with anger, which had long since burned off into something harder and quieter, but with the flat, honest account of someone describing weather. Told him about the board vote, and the cardboard box, and the 12 months, and she told it, without asking for pity, but without obscuring the weight of it either. Then she said, looked at that stop, looked at me, and made a decision in about 4 seconds. They saw what they saw and decided it wasn't their problem. A pause. "You looked at me and saw something different. I don't know exactly what. Isn't what they saw." Terry sat with that. Outside the window, DeKalb Avenue went about its business. A man walked a dog. Ivory truck double parked, and someone behind it leaned on a horn with the resigned patience of someone who knows it won't help but needs to do something with the feeling. "Why?" she asked. "Just that. No preamble." I've told this story across a table from a stranger since the grief counselor 5 years ago. He had told Jordan a version appropriate for a 4-year-old, then a slightly fuller version at 7. He had told Harold once, and Harold had received it with the gravity it deserved. He told it now, without ceremony. in the same flat, factual voice he used to describe a medication schedule or a mobility assessment, because he had learned that the sequence was the thing, order of the facts was what allowed the listener to follow the same path to arrive at the same place, I-78 westbound. A flatbed truck at the interchange. The driver's side door, the car across 2 lanes, the cup holder. It came on for half a second, then went dark. 14 cars that kept moving. The 15th that stopped. 7 minutes for the ambulance. 21 minutes of bleeding. 8 more. 9 minutes that were the entire distance between Monica walking through the front door the next morning and Monica not walking through any door again. When he finished, the coffee shop was unchanged. An espresso machine steamed something at the counter. 2 people at the window table negotiated quietly about the check. Vanessa was looking at him with the expression of someone who has just received the piece of context that makes everything else make sense. So you give your phone to anyone who asks. Her voice careful, not soft, careful, the distinction mattering. Oh, what it costs when the call doesn't go through, every time. It's not a decision, it's just what happens. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who have said the true thing and are sitting with what it means that it was true simultaneously. Lorraine had been quiet throughout. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at the table, the only visible sign that she was affected by what she'd heard, which was enough. Vanessa spoke first. I want to do something for you. I need you to hear all of it before you answer. Terry shifted slightly. He knew, a little shape, where this was going. No, he said before she could continue. You haven't heard it. The answer is no regardless. Lorraine cleared her throat. Not sharply, just enough, Mr. Coleman. My client has no legal obligation to you, not settlement or compensation. What she's proposing is entirely her own decision. Terry looked at Lorraine, then at Vanessa. He sat back. Vanessa put her hands flat on the table. $75,000. Not to you. An education fund for Jordan. Because in about 9 years he's going to be making college decisions. And the difference between a fund like that and no fund like that is that the difference between him choosing where to go and choosing whether he can go at all. Terry was quiet for a moment. The quiet of someone who is not speechless but deciding. For 12 months for that money, even. Unhurried. You slept in a car for it. I gave you a phone for 4 minutes. Those 2 things are not the same. Vanessa's voice dropped half a register. The register of something real beneath the composed surface. You didn't just give me a phone. You looked at me when I was invisible, and you saw a person. People decided in 4 seconds that I wasn't worth 4 minutes of their morning. You decided something different. Do you understand what that means? After 12 months of doors closing before I arrived, after sleeping in a car, walking into every room and having people look through you like you weren't there. Do you understand what it meant to have someone look and actually see? Terry said nothing, not because he didn't understand. He understood completely, lived in the version of the world she was describing, had lived in it for 5 years in faded scrubs, on buses, in the persistent invisibility of a man doing essential work that no one thought to notice. It meant to be looked through. He knew the specific internal shift when someone broke that pattern, when a look actually landed. He knew. Which was why what he said came from somewhere settled, not from impulse. One condition, held her gaze, don't make it just for Jordan. Build something bigger. Because Jordan is not the only kid in Brooklyn with a father who checks his account every morning and does the math and comes up short. He's not close to the only one. Thanking me for treating a stranger like a person, the most honest way to do that is to treat a lot more strangers like people. Vanessa looked at him. Then at Lorraine, raised one eyebrow. The expression of someone who did not see this coming and has decided on reflection that she should have. Then Vanessa looked back at Terry and something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, like the way a lock shifts when the right key turns. Just a small internal movement of something finding where it belongs. You want to make it a scholarship fund. I want to make sure it helps more than one family, Terry said. Because the reason you're sitting across from me is that I grew up in a world where people didn't have much and they still gave what they had. That's worth more than a private account for one kid. That's worth making into the actual thing. Lorraine was writing something in her legal pad. The sound of the pen was the only sound for a moment. Then Vanessa said, "Okay, we'll do it right." And for the first time since a boardroom in October of the previous years, the real first time, like them. Not the careful professional smile, but something beneath it. She smiled the way a person smiles when they've arrived somewhere that matches something they already believed the world could contain. Writes it. The article ran on a Thursday. Darnell Cooper had been writing for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle for 11 years, covering the community beat with the commitment of someone who had grown up in the neighborhoods he reported on and understood, without needing to be told, that the stories the large papers declined were frequently the ones that mattered most to the most people. Lorraine had known him since he was a junior reporter who had covered a case she won in 2014. Buck had called him on a Wednesday afternoon and told him the story over the phone without embellishment, because the story did not require it. Darnell took 2 days. He verified every fact independently, interviewed Terry and Vanessa separately, compared their accounts, found them consistent in the way of two people describing the same true thing from their individual positions. The headline was plain. As not a writer who reached for poetry when plain language would do the same work with more precision. He let her use his phone. The call she made saved 8 years of work. The piece ran in the local section Thursday morning. By noon it had been shared 4,000 times through the paper's social channels. By 5 o'clock 2 larger outlets had run their own summaries. By Friday morning it was moving through inboxes across the country with the particular velocity of stories that carry an emotional frequency people recognize as true. Not inspirational true, not feel-good true, but the specific frequency of something that describes how people actually treat each other and how rarely it is what it should be. The responses were what they are when a story like this travels. Some brief, people saying they needed it, longer, personal. Accounts of being helped or failing to help, the small undocumented transactions of human generosity that rarely get written down. A teacher in Houston used it in a classroom unit on choices and consequences. A man in Atlanta wrote that he had seen someone broken down on the shoulder of I-85 the morning after reading it and had pulled over for the first time in his life. Flat tire, dead phone, 11 minutes total, late to a meeting. Waiting was fine. The internet found Scott Hill on a Saturday. No one organized it. The federal court filings were public record. The names were public record. People read the article, searched Nova Bridge, found the filings, collected the points. The comments on Nova Bridge Medical's social accounts began arriving at a rate the content team had not planned for. Not threatening. Something more durable than threatening. Calm, factual, specific. Like posted excerpts from the court filing alongside questions. Shareholders who followed the accounts asked the same questions publicly in the comment threads. A financial journalist published a detailed thread on Sunday walking through the timeline. The board vote, the IP dispute, the investor materials that had described capabilities the company could not demonstrate. Overbridge board convened its third emergency session in 2 months. The previous 2 had been about legal exposure. This one was about the other kind. The kind that moves through valuation conversations and partnership discussions and the calculations institutional investors make when they assess whether a company's governance situation is stable enough to justify continued association. Scott Hill submitted his resignation 6 weeks after the article ran. The letter described his decision as personal and reflective of a desire not to create further distraction during a critical period. The board accepted it unanimously and announced an interim CFO and 2 independent directors. 2 weeks later, the full board voted 6-1 to reinstate Vanessa Carter as CEO, revised equity structure reflecting the original founding allocation and conditions attached. A restructured board, a 6-month performance review, 2 independent director seats. The reinstatement was earned, not gifted, and the conditions were real. Lorraine called with the vote count. Vanessa was in the client chair in the 125th Street office. The same chair she had sat in 9 months earlier, with the hard drive in her backpack and a parking garage receipt in her pocket, and the specific sparse courage of someone who has almost nothing left and is making the next move anyway. 6-1. It's done. Vanessa put her hand over her mouth. Not holding anything back, the hand just went there. The body's reflex to something it did not yet know how to hold. The 9% Foundation did not have a grand launch. Vanessa had suggested a proper venue with AV capability. Lorraine had suggested a hotel ballroom in Midtown. Terry said, without drama, that if the foundation was for the community, it should be in the community, and that ended the conversation. Myrtle Avenue Community Center had folding chairs and long tables and overhead lighting that was adequate and nothing more. Coffee came from the deli across the street in the silver urns they rented out for events, paper cups, a lighted sign on the table that said, "Help yourself." Vanessa had made it, and she was many things, but she was not a hand-lettered sign person, and Jordan had helped, and Jordan's contribution was evident in the letter sizing. His name had been Terry's, offered quietly during one of the logistical calls as they were working through the foundation's structure. The phone had been at 9%. Number felt like the whole thing compressed into 2 digits. The idea that what looks like almost nothing is, in the right hands at the right moment, exactly enough. 80 people came on a Tuesday evening in November, 8 more than they had planned for. Teachers from Jordan's school who had heard through the parent communication chain and arrived without being specifically invited. Neighbors who had recognized Terry from Darnell's photo. A group of Bright Care home health aides who had arranged the night off together. Their supervisor had read the article and agreed the occasion warranted it. Harold Reed in a wheelchair that his daughter in Phoenix had arranged for Darnell to help coordinate. Because Harold had called Darnell after reading the article and said simply, "I'd need to be there," and Darnell had made the calls. 8. Jordan sat in the front row in a button-up shirt he had chosen himself, which fit well in the shoulders and was slightly too long in the sleeves, in the way of Jordan's clothes generally. Ike cowled, because he was growing in the determined way of a child trying to keep up with his own trajectory. Terry stood at the front of the room, behind a music stand borrowed from the church next door. The community center's actual podium was being used for a different event. He was holding a sheet of paper he had written at 3, laid in the morning and rewritten at 4 and folded and unfolded enough times that the crease marks were visible from the 3rd row. He cleared his throat twice. His voice was not a room voice. It was built for kitchens and hospital corridors and the company of one person at a time. "I'm not good at this." The words came out at a volume that required the first few rows to lean slightly forward. "I'm good at making sure people take their medication on time and braiding my son's hair tight enough to last 2 days. Talking in front of people is not something I know how to do. I'm going to tell you what happened and trust that it's enough." A small laugh moved through the room, the laugh of people who believe what they've just heard and are there anyway. He told them about the bus stop. In order, without decoration, 9% battery, a woman who needed 1 phone call. 3 people who said no, what moved his hand forward when 3 other hands had withdrawn. And then he told them about Monica. He had not planned to go there. They had planned to tell the bus stop story and introduce Vanessa and sit down and let the foundation speak. Thing. But standing there with Jordan in the front row and Harold in the corner and 80 people in folding chairs offering the quality of attention that people offer when they understand they are being trusted with something real, that the complete story required itself to be complete. He told it in the same flat, factual sequence because he had learned that the sequence was what carried it. Later, the order of the facts was what allowed the thing to be understood rather than merely heard. He told it without stopping. He reached the place in the telling where his voice did what voices do when the body remembers what the mind is describing. Let it do that, and he kept going. In the front row, Jordan watched him, not with tears, not with the visible performance of understanding, with the clear, settled attention of a child who has been carrying a question for a long time and is watching, in real time, the question become part of the shared air between them. "I don't give my phone to people who ask because I'm generous." Looked at the room, at the 80 people in the folding chairs, at his son in the front row. "I do it because I'm scared. I'm scared of knowing what it looks like when the call doesn't go through. I've seen what that looks like. I'll carry it for the rest of my life." He looked at Jordan, "But it taught me something. It taught me that what I'm most afraid of is also the thing that makes me useful. I don't know if that's comfort or just information. It's the truest thing I have to offer tonight. 3 seconds of silence. Then Harold, Reed, in the corner, began to clap with both hands. The arthritis made it hurt. He clapped anyway. The room followed, not all at once, a gradual way of people who have each individually arrived at the same decision to affirm the same thing. Some stood, some stayed seated and clapped harder. In the front row, Jordan did not clap. Watched his father with the look that 9-year-olds are not supposed to know how to produce but sometimes do when they have been paying very close attention to the world for a very long time. Quiet, complete. Look of someone who has just watched a person they love say the true thing out loud in front of people and is holding the weight of it. Vanessa, 3 rows back, did not attempt to stop crying. She had made no such plan and she honored that. Face it. 3 months after the community center evening on a Wednesday night in late winter, Jordan was at the kitchen table with his homework spread across the full available surface, the pattern of a child who uses all the space because all the space is there. Terry was at the stove. One pan, aide architecture that had stabilized over the years into something efficient and reliable. The apartment was the apartment. Same 2 bedrooms, same walls, same kitchen floor cold underfoot in the mornings. Dad, Jordan was looking at his notebook. The pencil was tapping against his lip, the specific rhythm that meant he was thinking about something that wasn't on the page. Yeah, bud, Ms. Reyes said, to write about someone who changed your life. A pause. Writing about you. Terry kept his back to the room, kept stirring. That's good, Jay. The pencil stopped tapping. Dad, longer pause. You always give people your phone because you're thinking about mommy, right? The spoon stopped moving. Terry stood at the stove and did not turn around for a moment. Not because he was composing himself, but because the question had landed with such quiet, exact accuracy that his body needed a second to absorb it before the rest of him could respond. His 9-year-old son had just put 11 words around the thing Terry had spent 5 years circling without ever approaching from that specific angle. Turned around, Jordan was looking at him the same way he had looked at him from the front row at the community center. Clear, settled, patient. He already knew the answer, had probably known it for a while. Asking because saying it aloud was how it became part of the record between them. Yeah, Terry said. I think that's right. Jordan nodded once. The nod of someone receiving confirmation of something already understood, like completing a piece of knowledge that had been almost complete. He picked up his pencil and wrote something in his notebook. Terry turned back to the stove. He thought about what Jordan had just done. Not what he'd said, but what he'd done. A 9-year-old who had grown up without a mother in a 2-bedroom apartment in Crown Heights. With a father who wore the same faded scrubs 5 days a week and did impossible math every morning before breakfast, looked at 5 years of his father's behavior and traced it back to its source. Had named the connection that Terry had never named aloud. Had said it simply as a fact, without drama or accusation, and then gone back to his homework. Ain't lose, don't only leave absence. Terry had understood this in the abstract for a while. Had understood it the way you understand things that are true but haven't yet landed in the body. Standing at the stove on a Wednesday night in February, listening to his son right in the kitchen behind him, he felt it land. Monica had left shape. The loss had become the form that everything useful in him poured through. They had not understood that until a 9-year-old named it on a Wednesday night over homework, and now he could not unknow it, and he was not sure he wanted to. He did not have a word for what that was. He was not sure one was needed. Outside, Heights did what it did in the late winter evening. Bodega lights, street lights, the television on in the 3rd-floor apartment, across the way that always seemed to be on. Ordinary illumination of an ordinary block, in an ordinary borough of a city that was also always the specific place where specific lives were lived in ways that mattered completely. Terry Coleman stood at the stove and finished making dinner. Aine sat at the table writing about his father, and the apartment held them both the way it always had, small, cold-floored, exactly enough. At the morning, Vanessa Carter walked back into Nova Bridge Medical. She arrived 12 minutes early, not because she was anxious. She had used up her allotment of anxious, somewhere around month 6, somewhere between the motor lodge and the car, and what had replaced it was not confidence exactly, but something harder and quieter. The internal architecture of a person who has been reduced to their foundation and discovered that the foundation held. Arrived early because her body had been waking at 5:30 every morning for a year out of necessity, and bodies do not simply reset their set schedules because the circumstances change. She had been lying in the bedstee room, a proper room now, working radiator, a landlord who had met her eyes when she signed the lease, watching the ceiling get lighter since 5:30, and at 6:15 she got up and got dressed and went on the sidewalk outside the building for 40 seconds before going in, not performing anything, just standing there with the October air on her face. The same October air that had been on her face a year ago, when she walked out carrying a cardboard box and allowing herself the full awareness of what this moment was before it became the next moment and then the one after that, and eventually just a fact, like the way all the hardest moments eventually become just facts if you survive them long enough. Raymond was at the security desk. He looked up when she came through the revolving door. This time he did not look at his screen. He met her eyes. A meeting of it was the acknowledgement of everything that had happened between the last time she walked through this door and this time, all of it compressed into a single held look. And then he nodded. Same nod he had given her every morning for 4 years before the morning he hadn't. Vanessa nodded back. She held her new key card over the reader. The light went green. She took the elevator to the 32nd floor. Same elevator, same brushed steel interior, same slight hesitation between 29 and 30 that had been there since the building's last renovation. She had ridden this elevator approximately 2,000 times, out in the center of it, and felt all 2,000 of them, including the one that had gone down instead of up 14 months ago with the cardboard box. Then the doors opened on 32, and she stepped out. Her office was at the end of the hall. Someone had cleaned it recently. She could tell from the threshold the quality of a room that had been prepared without being occupied, all surfaces cleared, air undisturbed. Scott Hill had not moved in. They had half expected to find evidence of territorial claim, some residue of occupation, and the absence of it was its own thing. The way a room emptied of someone's presence sometimes holds the shape of the absence more clearly than it retained the shape of the person. She set her bag on the desk, opened her laptop, looked out the window at Tribeca 32 floors below, doing its morning thing. The view was the same view. The streets were the same streets. Vanessa Carter, standing at this window, was not the same person who had stood here 14 months ago. And the difference was not the legal outcome, not the reinstatement vote, the foundation or the article, or any of the external events that had reorganized the visible shape of her circumstances. The difference was in how she understood what she had built, and why she had built it, and for whom, an understanding that had been theoretical before the motor lodge and the car and the 8 mornings on a bench watching the people care sink was designed to serve move through their actual days. They sat down and opened her email. First item, a meeting with Nova Bridge's engineering team. Second, a call with the community health organization in Detroit that had been waiting on Module 7's integration. Third, flagged in a separate calendar color, call Terry Coleman. Not because the call required a calendar reminder, because she wanted to mark it as a fixed point in the day, something that was going to happen rather than something that might. Made the engineering call first, 8 people. Some she had hired directly. One had been brought on during her suspension and had never met her. She introduced herself to that one specifically. There was a beat in the introduction slightly longer than introductions usually run, both of them aware of the specific circumstances they were navigating, and then they got to work. The engineering work was substantial, not because the product was broken. CareSync in the 60% version had been a functioning, genuinely useful platform. The 23 states using it had real outcomes. Patients who received better coordinated care, caregivers whose administrative load had been reduced, family members notified in time about situations that would not have reached them otherwise. The product worked. It worked below its capacity. The way a person whose circumstances have forced them into survival mode works below their capacity, efficiently and persistently and usefully, but not at the full expression of what they were built to do. L7 was the full expression, the real-time multi-system synchronization. The integration framework that allowed CareSync to communicate with legacy health system APIs in actual real time, reducing data handoff lag from hours to seconds, and making the system seamless rather than merely simpler. She had spent 3 years building it on personal time, and it had been on a hard drive in a backpack for 14 months, and it was time to put it where it had always been meant to go. Technical integration work took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of calls and commits and testing cycles, and the patient-specific labor of building something into an existing system. Harder in most ways than building from the start, as you have to understand not just what the new piece does, but how every existing piece will respond to it. Terry knew something about this. It said as much during one of the Sunday dinners that had established themselves quietly over the months that followed. Not planned as a recurring event, simply becoming one, because Vanessa had come by one Sunday to drop off foundation paperwork and stayed for the meal already on the stove. And the next Sunday she came back, by the 4th. Sunday, the question of whether this was a thing that happened had been resolved by the fact that it was happening. Jordan had opinions about the food Vanessa brought. He expressed them without diplomatic softening, direct manner of a child who had not yet learned to perform gratitude for things he did not actually prefer. The soup was good, he told her one evening, gesturing at the container from the Jamaican spot on Fulton. Plain at the bread from the bakery near the subway. That bread is too fancy. It has seeds I don't understand. Vanessa glanced at Terry over Jordan's head. But Terry had the expression of a man who has learned that the appropriate response to Jordan's food commentary is silence and patience. I'll make a note about the seeds, Vanessa said. They're okay, Jordan said, already eating the bread. I just wanted you to know I noticed them. These evenings were not dramatic. They were not the kind of scenes that fit a particular narrative shape, like they were dinner. Jordan's homework across the kitchen table, while Lorraine and Vanessa worked through foundation logistics and Terry cooked for whoever was there. It were Harold Reed, calling on Thursday evenings, because Terry had given him Vanessa's number specifically. So Harold could ask technical questions about the CareSync interface that the Bright Care training materials had not adequately explained. Harold had approached this task with the thoroughness of a man who had spent 40 years doing precise work and expected things to work precisely. The notification timing, Harold said on one of these calls, his voice carrying the slightly elevated volume of someone who has not fully adjusted to the fact that modern phones don't require projection. The alert goes to the family contact when I haven't opened the refrigerator by 9 in the morning. But what if I'm simply not hungry at 9? What if that particular morning I'm just not hungry? Vanessa explained the adjustable threshold settings in the patient interface. Harold listened carefully. So I can set it to 10? You can set it to whatever fits your routine. A pause. I want it at 9:30. I might not be hungry at 9, but I will definitely have wanted something by 9:30. She adjusted his threshold to 9:30 personally. It took 45 seconds. Far more. She thought about those 45 seconds afterward. About what it had taken to do something that made a specific difference to a specific 81-year-old man in a rent-stabilized apartment on Fulton Street. About how the product had always been built for Harold Reed. For the Harold Reeds. For the people who needed a system that fit their lives rather than asking them to fit the system. She had known this intellectually for 8 years. She had not understood it the same way until she sat on a bench at a bus stop and watched the people it was for. The Module 7 integration went live on a Wednesday morning in March. No announcement. A technical deployment note to the engineering team and partner organizations. Standard documentation. And then she sat at her desk and watched the monitoring dashboard as the new integration layer activated across the existing user base, and the data synchronization that had been lagging by hours resolved in real time, and the system became, the first time, the thing she had designed it to be. She called Terry that afternoon video call because she wanted him to see the screen. She held the laptop so the camera caught the monitoring dashboard, the numbers updating in real time, Data flows between systems that had been stalled for 3 years finally moving the way they were supposed to move. The active user count in the upper right corner showing the people whose care coordination was running right now through the thing she had built in a kitchen and carried in a backpack through 12 months of diminishing circumstances, which is what the call at the bus stop made possible, she said. Not just this. But this is what was on the line. Terry looked at the screen for a moment, at the dashboard, at the data moving cleanly between systems, at the number in the corner. Her voice was quiet and certain. It started in your kitchen. The bus stop was just where it didn't get stopped. She looked at him through the screen. The man who had handed her a phone at 8% battery without asking for a reason. I had built a scholarship foundation from an act of grief he had never labeled as anything other than what it was. I cooked enough food for whoever came on Sunday evenings and braided his son's hair tight enough to last 2 days and got to Harold Reed's apartment at 7:30 every morning with something still in reserve, because he had figured out that 13 extra minutes of sleep was the difference between arriving with something left and arriving hollow. Thank you, she said. Not for the phone, not for the bus stop specifically. The thing that had produced the phone at the bus stop. The 9 minutes and the 14 cars, and the loss he had carried into a reflex he had not understood, was what it was until his son named it on a Wednesday night over homework. Nodded. Once, the nod of someone receiving something and choosing to hold it rather than deflect it, the 9% Foundation gave its first 3 scholarship awards that spring. Lorraine managed the selection process with the rigor she applied to everything that required it. Applications came from families across Brooklyn and eventually, as word spread through the Daily Eagle article and the community center evening, families in Queens and the Bronx. The eligibility criteria were clear: first-generation college students, single-parent households, household income below $40,000 annually. The award amount was not full tuition, ever been intended to be. The goal was what Terry had named at the coffee shop on DeKalb: closing the gap between possible and impossible. The number work enough that the question of whether to go became a real question rather than a rhetorical one. $50,000 across 3 awards, the remaining $25,000 held in the Foundation's operating account for the following cycle, supplemented by donations that had continued arriving in the months after the article. A businessman in Atlanta sent a check for $12,000 with a note that said simply, "I know this neighborhood, I know these kids." Terry held the note for a minute, before filing it with the donation records, the particular sitting of someone making sure they feel the full weight of something before moving on. The selection committee was Lorraine, Vanessa, a high school counselor from Bed-Stuy named Kathleen Robinson, who had come to the community center evening and stayed to help afterward, a tired Brooklyn College admissions officer named Jeffrey Lewis, who had heard about the foundation through a colleague. Terry was not on the committee. He had declined on the accurate grounds that he would not be objective. He would read the essays after the decisions were made. He read them at the kitchen table after Jordan was in bed. The first was from a young woman named Denise, whose mother was a home health aide. Different agency, same work, working 60 hours a week across 3 client assignments to keep Denise in uniform. Fed and enrolled in the AP classes the essay described with the clear-eyed gratitude of someone who understands exactly what it cost. Denise wrote about her mother's hands, about the roughness of them, what the roughness meant, and what she intended to do with the education her mother's hands were funding. Terry set the essay down after the first page. He got up, walked to the window, stood for a moment looking at the street below, the bodega lights, the floor television across the way that always seemed to be on, ordinary ongoing city that did not pause for the weight of a man standing at a window thinking about hands. Then he went back and finished it. The second essay was from a young man whose father had driven the B38 bus for 16 years. Essay was about what you see from a bus window that you don't see from a car, the close-up granularity of a neighborhood observed over years, block by block, in all weather, at all hours. The young man's theory, leapt through 16 years of riding his father's route after school, was that the people nobody noticed were the ones who understood the city most completely. He wanted to study urban planning. He wanted to build systems for the people on his father's route. The third essay was from a young woman who wanted to be a lawyer. Her mother was a building superintendent, 7 years managing a 12-unit building in Crown Heights. The practical authority, the complete lack of formal recognition, the daily negotiation with landlords and contractors and city inspectors. The young woman wrote, "People who know the most about how systems fail are the people those systems were not built to protect. I want to be the person who takes that knowledge into the rooms where it can do something." Child folded the essays back into their envelopes when he finished. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment for a while, not doing anything particular, just sitting with the specific gratitude of someone who has been given the chance to be part of something that will continue without him, that will exist when he is not looking at it. It has taken on the momentum of things that are true and useful and aimed at a need that is real. He thought about Monica the way he had learned to think about her over 5 years. Not the way of someone who has set grief aside, of someone who has learned to carry it alongside the thinking, rather than waiting for it to finish before the thinking can begin. She had understood in the clinical precision of her ICU work what it meant to intervene at the right moment. She had spent her career at the intersection of skill and timing, knowing that what you do and when you do it were both part of the same calculation, inseparable. Spoke about the timing of a phone at a bus stop, about the way outcomes depend on moments that no one marks in advance as pivotal. Life, about the way the most important door in your life often opens when you are thinking about something else entirely. He went to bed. 6 months after Module 7 went live, Vanessa was in the waiting room of a community health clinic in Detroit. The clinic served a neighborhood where the median household income was $22,000 and the nearest full emergency department was a 20-minute drive without traffic, which meant it was never a 20-minute drive. They had been using CareSync for 8 months, the base version first, and then, since the March deployment, the fully integrated version. Outcomes data the clinic director had shared before the visit was specific and verifiable, and the kind that made Vanessa feel, in the particular way she had been trying not to feel things too directly since the reinstatement, accumulated weight of what the past 8 years had been for. 9 patients whose health events the monitoring system had flagged in time for intervention. Not all serious. But one of them, the case the director had mentioned first on the phone, was a 71-year-old woman named Dorothy who had lived alone in the same house in the same neighborhood for 40 years. A daughter in Cincinnati who called every Sunday, a doctor she saw every 6 months. A CareSync account her daughter had set up after the clinic offered free registration to qualifying patients. On a Tuesday morning in January, at 8:47 a.m., Dorothy had not opened her refrigerator. The system flagged the deviation from her established morning pattern. By 8:52, her daughter in Cincinnati had received an alert. By 9:15, the daughter had called Dorothy's neighbor Sandra, had a spare key. By 9:22, Sandra had found Dorothy on the kitchen floor. Not the bathroom, the kitchen, reaching for the coffee maker she had been making on the same schedule every morning since 1987, the same schedule CareSync had learned over 8 months and recognized was not happening this particular Tuesday. Dorothy was okay. Hip fracture, surgery, rehabilitation, the long road of a 71-year-old body recovering from a fall, was okay in the sense that mattered, which was that she was alive and recovering and would, her daughter had told the clinic director, with the particular emotion of someone processing how differently things could have gone. By spring, Vanessa sat in the waiting room and thought about her mother, Patricia Carter. On the tile floor of the Cascais Heights bathroom, 4 hours before anyone found her. About the towel rack positioned slightly too high. About the specific purpose that had animated 8 years of work and 12 months of diminishing circumstances, and a bus stop on Nostrand Avenue, and everything that had come from that bus stop. The clinic director came out to meet her, Thomas, brisk and focused, the manner of someone who has spent decades making a lot work with not much and has developed a practical peace with that arithmetic. Dorothy asked if she could meet you. Angela said, "They're still doing PT here twice a week. Room 3? I don't need to take her time. She's been asking since I told her you were coming." A pause. "You should go." Room 3 was small, a window looking onto a parking lot, motivational poster on the wall that had been there long enough to have developed a slight curl at its lower left corner. Dorothy was seated by the window, left leg extended. The careful arrangement of someone who knows exactly how much movement is currently advisable. Small woman, large glasses, the quality of attention of someone who does not waste it. "You're the one who built the thing," Dorothy said, before Vanessa could introduce herself. "Not a question. Dorothy looked at her for a moment. "Sandra told me. She walked in and I was on the floor by the coffee maker." A pause. "I don't remember falling. I remember reaching for it, and then I remember the hospital. That's all that's in between." Vanessa sat in the chair across from her and said nothing, because nothing was what the moment called for. "My daughter set up the account," she said. "I told her I didn't need monitoring, that I was perfectly capable," she said. "Just try it 3 months." She looked at her hands in her lap, the refrigerator thing. "I thought that was a bit much," asking whether I opened the refrigerator, a small sound that was almost a laugh. But on a Tuesday in January, it turned out to be exactly the right amount of much. Vanessa looked at this woman. The large glasses, the extended leg, a compact dignity of someone who had been fiercely independent for 71 years, and had arrived at a moment that required her to revise what independence actually meant. "I built it because my mother fell," Vanessa said, alone in her bathroom. 4 hours before anyone found her. She was all right. But I kept thinking about what would have been different if someone had known to check. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "How is your mother now?" "Move closer to me." "After everything that happened, she came to Brooklyn." A pause. "She has strong opinions about the neighborhood." "Mothers always have strong opinions about the neighborhood," Dorothy said. The laugh that came out of Vanessa was genuine and unplanned. The laugh of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and is briefly relieved of it by a stranger who said exactly the right ordinary thing. She called Terry from the airport on the way back to New York, audio only, not video. The kind of call that exists between people who have moved past the stage of needing to see each other to feel that the conversation is real. "I met a patient today. Dorothy, 71. She's doing PT twice a week and she has strong opinions about whether refrigerator monitoring constitutes a reasonable level of surveillance." "What did she decide?" "That on a Tuesday in January it was exactly the right amount." Terry was quiet for a moment. She could hear faintly in the background the television Jordan apparently needed on while doing homework. A habit she had observed across several Sunday dinners without fully understanding, and had decided was not her question to ask. "How are you doing?" he said. Not "how was the trip?" "How are you?" The distinction was the whole thing. She sat with it the way she had learned to sit with things. Not performing the response, actually determining what it was. "Better than I've been in a while," she said. "I think I'm doing what I was supposed to be doing. It took me a minute to get back here, 12 months. It carried a dryness that had developed gradually in his manner toward her over these months. The comfortable irreverence of someone who no longer needed to be careful, because careful was no longer the right register between them. 12 months and some change," she said. The airport moved around her the way airports move. Organized chaos, everyone mid-story, everyone between one thing and the next. She watched a man carry a child through the concourse on his shoulders, a child pointing at something above the crowd with the delighted authority of someone with information the ground-level people didn't have. She watched a woman in navy scrubs, a Bright Care Senior Services logo on the chest, pulling a rolling bag toward the departures board with the focused economy of someone navigating an unfamiliar airport on a tight schedule. Vanessa watched the Bright Care logo pass. "Terry, yeah. Jordan said something at dinner last month about wanting to be a lawyer because lawyers help people keep what belongs to them." A pause. "Did you tell him about the case?" He read the article. "Darnell used my name. He's 9. He reads at an 8th grade level. A teacher told me this in a tone that suggested I should do something about it." "What did you do?" "Got him more books from the library." The laugh came out of her again. The second genuine unplanned laugh in a single afternoon. She had been keeping informal count of them, in the way of someone who spent a year in circumstances where genuine, unplanned laughter was not available, and is now noting its return with quiet attention. Oh, Jordan, the lawyers also spend a lot of time sitting in rooms waiting for things to happen, she said. I'll pass that along, Terry said. It won't deter him. In September, 6 months after Module 7 went live, months after the Detroit visit, Lorraine Mitchell added a feature to the CareSync development log from her office on 125th Street. It was not a formal request. She had mentioned it to Vanessa in a call a few weeks earlier, liked almost in passing. Lorraine mentioned things she considered important, but did not consider requiring argument, because she had spent 22 years learning to distinguish between what needed to be fought for and what simply needed to be said. It was small. A single additional trigger in the monitoring system's alert logic. When a user's designated emergency contact's phone dropped below 15% battery, the system would send an automatic notification to that contact's secondary number. An alternate designee users could register during account setup, noting that the primary contact's phone was running low and providing an opportunity to reach out through other means. Lines of code. 45 minutes for the engineering team to build, test, and push to production. It affected every CareSync user with a linked emergency contact, which, across the 23 states where CareSync operated at current user base, was approximately 240,000 people. Over 240,000 people whose emergency contact networks now had a layer of redundancy that had not existed before. 240,000 people whose safety architecture now included a small automated protection against the precise failure mode that had cost Monica Reed Coleman her life on the shoulder of I-78 on a Tuesday night in November. Ace had a name in the internal development log. Not a public name. It did not appear in the interface or in any documentation users would see. It was an internal identifier, liked by the engineering team in builds and testing and version history that only developers ever opened. The name was Monica. Vanessa told Terry about it on a Sunday evening in October, not building toward it, not planning it, in the kitchen after dinner. Jordan, in his room with the door open in the way that meant he was not asleep but was considering it. And the dishes were done, like Vanessa mentioned it, the way she mentioned things that were important, but that she did not want to make into ceremonies, because making them ceremonies would mean the moment belonged to the ceremony rather than to itself. Terry was quiet for longer than usual. She did not fill the silence. She had learned over these months that his silences were not empty. They were doing something, and the right response was to let them do it. Does it work? He said finally. Led across 12,000 scenarios, Vanessa said. It works, he nodded. Slow, final, the nod of something being received and placed somewhere it will stay. Thank you. His voice was exactly the right volume for what it was carrying. Looked at him across the kitchen counter and said nothing. Because sometimes the only honest response to thank you is to hold the space where it lands and let it mean what it means. 1 year and 2 days after a Wednesday morning at a bus stop on Nostrand Avenue, Terry Coleman sat on the same bench at the B46 stop in the same light blue scrubs and checked his phone 7%. Nothing visible about his life was largely the same. Still a home health aide at $15.25 an hour. Still the apartment on Nostrand, same 2 bedrooms, same kitchen floor, cold under bare feet on early mornings. Jordan was in 4th grade now, reading at a level that continued to give his teachers productive concern. Recently announced that if he was going to be a lawyer, he needed to understand how money worked. A statement that had led to a conversation about compound interest that went further than Terry had anticipated for a Saturday morning. Math was better. Not resolved, not comfortable, not the kind of math that lets you stop checking the account first thing in the morning. But the impossible gap had become a merely difficult gap, and a merely difficult gap was something Terry Coleman had years of practice navigating. The 9% Foundation had given 3 scholarships and was reviewing applications for a 4th cycle. A Brooklyn community development organization had read the Daily Eagle article called Lorraine, and the conversation had resulted in a grant sufficient to fund 2 additional awards. Lorraine managed the legal structure, Kathleen Robinson managed the review process. Vanessa handled donor relationships with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent years in investor meetings and understood that the conversations were different, but the underlying dynamic was the same. But asking people to believe that what you were building was worth investing in. Harold Reed had told him something on a Thursday morning 3 weeks earlier, through the newspaper reading they still did together. Not because Harold's eyesight hadn't improved enough with his new glasses to manage it himself, but because the reading had become the thing they did together, value having separated itself from its original practical purpose the way certain routines do when they outlast their necessity and become worthwhile in themselves. Harold had put the paper down mid-article and looked at Terry. "Oh, what's different about you now?" Terry had looked at him. "What, you used to pour," Harold said. "Every morning you came in here pouring, into this apartment, into the work, into wherever Jordan needed it, pouring from whatever was in you. And that was not nothing, you had a great deal in you. But it was always outgoing." He looked at his hands, the carpenter's hands, broad, the knuckles prominent now, resting on the chair arms. "How you pour and something returns. I can see it in how you carry yourself. Something is coming back." Terry had sat with that, then picked up the paper and found the place they had left off. He sat with it in the days after, turning to it at intervals, turning it over, something coming back. He knew what it was connected to. It had something to do with a foundation and 3 scholarship essays and a 71-year-old woman named Dorothy in a PT room in Detroit, and a monitoring feature that bore a name that no user would ever see, but that was there, present, on its work every day. He knew it had something to do with Jordan in the front row of a community center in November, not clapping, just watching. It had something to do with sitting on a bench at a bus stop for 8 mornings and watching the city's invisible workforce move through its labor, understanding, not intellectually, but in the cellular way that understanding becomes permanent, that their invisibility was a choice the city made, not a fact about the people themselves. He was looking at his phone at 7%, at the text from Vanessa that arrived every Wednesday at approximately this hour, 9%, when footsteps stopped in front of him, a man, early 40s. The quality of clothes that had been slept in recently, the recent kind, not the habitual kind, a distinction visible to someone who knew what to look for. Laces on his left shoe retied that morning with the particular knot of someone in a hurry. Hands at his sides, closely clenched, the hands of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say and is not certain it will come out right. "Hey man," careful voice reaching for casual. "Sorry to bother you. My phone died. I just need to make one call." Looked up. The same fraction of a second, the same rapid human calculation in which a person is reduced to their visible variables and a verdict is rendered. Verdict the first 3 people at this stop had rendered 1 year and 2 days ago, correct by every metric except the one that mattered. Terry looked at this man, saw the retied laces, saw the hands, saw the specific uprightness of someone holding himself together by will in a public space, the dignity of a person asking for something while braced for the word no. He held out his phone here, the same low, matter-of-fact voice it had always been, that it had been for 5 years before the bus stop and for the year since. "Take what you need." The man looked at the phone. His jaw shifted slightly, the small internal rearrangement of someone who prepared for rejection and received the opposite. He took the phone. He dialed from memory, which meant the number was important enough to have memorized. Stepped a few feet to the side for privacy, the same distance Vanessa had taken 1 year and 2 days ago. Close enough that Terry could still see the phone, far enough to hold the conversation. Terry did not listen. He looked at Nostrand Avenue, October, 1 year later. The West Indian bakery 2 doors down, still producing the bread he still walked past without stopping. A woman in a bright care uniform, different agency, logo colors, getting off the B46 with the walk of someone with somewhere specific to be. A child on the far sidewalk navigating a bicycle around a double-parked delivery truck with the focused care of someone new to the enterprise. The city doing what it did. All of it happening in the space between this bench and that bakery and the delivery truck and the child, all of it real and continuing and completely indifferent to any single moment within it. except that the moments were not indifferent to each other. This is what Terry Coleman understood. Sitting on a bench on Nostrand Avenue at 9:52 in the morning, not as an idea, but as something that lived in the body, in the hands, reflexes that 5 years of grief and loss and love had built into him. The moments were not indifferent to each other. The moment at this bus stop 1 year ago had produced the article and the foundation and the three scholarship essays, and Dorothy in room 3, and a monitoring feature bearing a name that 240,000 people would never see, but that was there, isn't, doing its work today and every day. And the moment before that, on IC8 westbound, the screen lighting for half a second, 14 cars that kept moving, had produced this one. Had produced the reflex that produced the phone had produced everything. And this moment, this ordinary Wednesday, this man with his reeded lace making a call with 7% of someone else's battery, would produce something, too. Terry did not know what, could not. It was not how it worked. What you could know was only whether you were the kind of person who held the phone out, and the knowing of it had to be its own answer, not contingent on the outcome, because the outcome was not the point. The point was the holding out. The call lasted 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The man came back and returned the phone with both hands. The careful, two-handed return of someone treating a thing with appropriate weight. "Thank you, man." Icely, he stopped. Looked at Terry the way people look when the words available are not large enough for what they mean. "You have no idea." Terry took the phone. "Everything okay? Better now." The man's voice had changed. Lighter, a specific quality of someone who has resolved something that had been heavy. A lot better. Surfed off down Nostrand with a different gait than the one he'd arrived with. The walk of someone from whom something has been lifted, and Terry watched him go. Up B46 came around the corner with its familiar hiss, and the doors folded open, and Terry stood and shouldered his bag. 6% battery now, still enough. They got on the bus, and found his seat by the window, and Crown Heights moved past the glass in the ordinary, detailed way of a neighborhood that exists completely regardless of whether anyone is watching it. And Terry Coleman rode toward Harold Reed's apartment and thought about nothing in particular. Which is to say, he thought about everything, the way you do when you have arrived. At last, understanding that the life you are living is not a smaller version of some other life you were supposed to have, but is in fact the thing itself, carrying every loss and every Sunday dinner and every scholarship essay, and every 71-year-old woman named Dorothy, and every 9-year-old who does not clap, but watches with the eyes of someone who has been paying very close attention for a very long time. A bus turned onto Fulton, the October morning continued, and on a server in a data center in Northern Virginia, quietly and without ceremony, a monitoring feature named Monica sent its first alert of the day to a family contact in Cincinnati, noting that the primary contact's phone was running low, that someone might want to reach out, that the signal was still there, transmitting, still doing the work it had been built to do, just doing what it was built to do exactly enough.